Yeah. Well, I worked for the NHL for about 8 years as an off-ice official for the Caps. And we had a saying, you know what's red, white, blue, and green? Caps playing golf in April. So. All right, here we go. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. First off, it's going to be about crime and digital forensics, not about security too much. So I'm going to define the cyber environment that we have to work with in law enforcement, some of the legal issues involved, intrusions, critical infrastructure, specifically, different cyber crimes that you would not probably suspect, digital forensics, and then my latest project, which I've been working on since early September into August, which is the D.B. Cooper cold case. So, how many of you remember D.B. Cooper? Good, good. So, you'll enjoy this. So, what does cyber mean anyway? When I was with DoD, they would. Each agency would define cyber a different way. Well, in 1996, I got detailed to the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee for Investigations. And we were to hold, was chaired by Senator Sam Nunn, and our task was to investigate the threat to the national information infrastructure from cyberspace. And one of our witnesses that came was the director of the CIA, John Deutsch. And John Deutsch was testifying on foreign information warfare capabilities. And right in the middle, now, Senator Nunn is an accomplished attorney, right? And what do trial attorneys do? They never ask questions they already don't know the answer to, right? Well, in the middle of Deutsch's testimony, he said, what does cyber mean anyway? And, Deutsch's face went pale. His jaw dropped. He clearly didn't know. And he said, may I have a moment? And he turned, and of course he's got, 27, staffers with him. And they have a huddle for about 30 seconds. And he comes back and says, I'll have to get back to you, Senator. So, the very next day, he sent this letter. And so I'll try to read it here for you. It says, Dear Senator Nunn, during yesterday's hearings on foreign information warfare capability, you asked a rather indelicate question. What does cyber mean anyway? I must admit that your query caused a great deal of discomfort here. While everyone had used the term, no one had heretofore felt any need to know precisely what the hell it meant. I put hell in there, he didn't. In light of my promise to keep Congress fully and currently informed, I pressed for an answer. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA's research revealed that the term cybernetics was coined by the father of cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, in 1948. Mr. Weiner's words, we have decided to call the entire field of control and communications theory, whether in a machine or an animal, by the name cybernetics, which we formed from the Greek cybernesters or steersmen. Department of State concurred with CIA's findings, but wished to point out that the Greek cybernetes is related to the Latin gubernator, meaning steersman or governor. The Defense Intelligence Agency, Flynn ran the Defense Intelligence Agency, just keep that in mind. The Defense Intelligence Agency is not yet ready to make a judgment and is exploring the possibility that cyber may have come from the Greek cybisteter or diver, from which we derive the word cybisteter, or a genus of large diving beetles. I hope this clears up any confusion. So, that being said, let's talk a little bit about crime in general. So, what are the motives for crime? They run the gamut. Love, hate, activism, mental illness, peer pressure. They literally run the gamut. And every tool that mankind has ever made and developed has been turned around and used as a weapon, whether it was a rock, a stick, an ice pick, a bottle, a rope, So we shouldn't be, shocked that people take computers, which were supposed to help, and make them a weapon system. Whoops. What the hell happened there? So there are three kinds of, all crime falls into about three categories. Crimes against persons and property, rapes, drugs, murders, child pornography, bullying, fraud, identity theft, theft of intellectual property, wire fraud, online scams, and then counterintelligence, which includes counterterrorism and espionage. And so everything falls in those three categories. And computers play three roles also. So a computer can be the victim. Somebody hacks into the computer becomes a victim. Or it could be a witness. Maybe it's just a pass-through, and the witness doesn't even know that the bad guy went through their system. And then the subject computer, the computer that actually is used to launch the attack, or has the child pornography on it. So, tools of the trade for any executive, criminal, spy, or terrorist, and some would say, they're all the same. You have to have reliable communication. You have to have your documentation. You have to have contact with your partners, so you have to have their information. Be able to do business wherever you are. You've got to be mobile. Social media today. So what tools are you going to use? You're going to use the internet, smartphones, and laptops. So there are several legal issues that we have to discuss too. There's, law is kind of a multidisciplinary field. So there's criminal law, and then there's procedural law. So criminal law says what is illegal, what's against the law, and the elements of proof to prove it. And there are laws against rapes, drugs, murder, intrusions, things like that. And then there's procedural law. Procedural law tells law enforcement how we are allowed to collect evidence. How do we get a wiretap order? How do we get a search warrant? The fact that we have to get a search warrant for things. Rights advisement. So that's procedural law. And procedural law is always a balance between individuals' rights of privacy and public safety. And you can see that pendulum, it swings depending on the recent environment. So, when 9/11 occurred, prior to that, the pendulum has swung towards privacy. Soon as we had 9/11, Congress passed the Patriot Act, gave law enforcement a lot more capabilities. But now that we haven't had a major terrorist attack, it's starting to slide back towards privacy. And then legal issues, especially in the cyber environment, are international. So each country has its own legal infrastructure and its own sovereignty. So we have to have mutual assistance agreements with other countries. Some cooperate, some do not cooperate. Some have a cyber capability, some do not. So let's talk a little bit about a cyber attack. So I think that defending against a cyber attack is the opposite of defending against a nuclear attack. So, thank you. That concludes my briefing for the day. I'm going to end on a high note. If you think about nukes, especially now when we're talking about North Korea and Iran, we know who the bad guys are and who has nukes or who is developing that capability, and we have a significant surveillance on those sumbitches, right? And if they were to launch an attack, we would know within, in case of North Korea, we know they're preparing to do that. If they launch an attack, we're going to know within a fraction of a second that there was a launch, and pretty quickly we'll be able to determine the trajectory and what the target's going to be. And we have a response. But in the case of a cyber attack, it's the opposite. Now we got to sit back, because everybody has the capability. You all have the capability in your flipping pockets today. So anybody can launch that attack. So now we have to sit back, can't surveil everybody, So you have to sit back and wait for the attack to occur, and then work backwards after the attack for the attribution. Much more difficult. And then, to complicate things, is the legal issues. Here in America, these are exclusion zones for the military and the intelligence community. Posse comitatus prevents the military and intelligence community from watching and surveilling in the United States. So it's a law enforcement issue. So now there's law enforcement domestically, and law enforcement can go internationally. And then the intelligence community and the military are international. So speed counts, especially in a cyber attack. The bad guys are coming at you literally almost at light speed. And the second part of the problem is that our legal system is geocentric. So if you think about jurisdiction, it's based on a piece of geography, a city, county, state, tribe, campus, country. Cyber doesn't respect any of those arbitrary man-made borders. And attribution is the Holy Grail. So whenever there's a cyber attack, you have to know where the sumbitch's fingers are on the keyboard. And, when you discover a breach, how did they get in? Was it an insider or an outsider attack? Are they still in your network? That's kind of interesting. Did they leave anything behind? Did they change anything while they were there? And then you need to decide if you want attribution. If you're a private company, do you want attribution? Do you care? If it's an insider, do you have the in-house capabilities to achieve that attribution? Or do you have to hire a contractor? Or do you want to call law enforcement? If it's an outsider, you really don't have much choice. You have to call law enforcement because you can't reach back and follow the trail for the attribution after the attack is gone. So, intrusions in information warfare. So how many of you read The Cuckoo's Egg? Good. So that was my case back in 1996. So if you read the book, I'm in it 34 times. Now, the reason I know I'm in it 34 times is because my general, who spelled computer with a K, heard that I would, Cliff, when he was writing the book, was sending me the manuscript, and we were trying to keep it as accurate as possible when he was writing it. And he said, my general found out about it. And he says, send me a copy of the manuscript and highlight everywhere your name and OSI, which was my organization, is mentioned, because he wanted to know if I embarrassed the Air Force and OSI. So that's how I know I'm in there. So my mother read the book, and you know what she said to me? I was so proud. I'm in a book. I've been an agent for all of about a year and a half, and my mother reads the book and says, you're the only one in the book that cursed. So everybody knows about the Hanover hacker case, West German hackers, so we won't go into that. Marsworm. Everybody remember the Marsworm in 1988? Okay. Well, OSI was the first law enforcement agency to be notified about that. Well, that's not true. We're the first agency that did anything about it. Cliff Stoll was actually my source again, and he called me and said, hey, you know what's going on? I said, no. So he told me what was going on. And so we were able to go out and protect and collect evidence that a lot of the military computers. So I notified the FBI, and they had been notified initially and kind of blew it off. They didn't know what to do with it. So I called the case agent that I worked with, on the Hanover hacker case, and said, hey, Mike Gibbons. I said, Mike, do you know what's going on? And you guys were notified 8 hours ago, and you haven't even called back. So we worked the case together. Quickly, Robert Marsh Jr. was identified and arrested. The interesting fact is that his father, Robert Marsh Sr., was the chief scientist for NSA's National Computer Security Center. And so I had him on our Meet the Fed panel at DEF CON a couple of times. So the goons introduced me. They said, do you know Robert Marsh? Because he's like, a legend. And I said, well, yeah, I met him a couple of times a long time ago. And they said, well, okay. So he said, you look familiar. I said, yeah, I participated in the arrest of your son. Oh, how you doing? And then recently, our presidential election. I mean, it's clear the Russians tried to influence our election. But we shouldn't be shocked about that shit. I mean, dogs chase cats. I mean, really, what is an intel organization supposed to do? I mean, shit, if we're not doing it, then our guys aren't doing their job. So, and what kind of perplexing is, you remember the DNC system when Senator Sanders' staffers hacked into Clinton's database of donors? That's a violation of USC 1030. How come there was no investigation on that? I mean, that was clear violation, insider exceeding their authorization level. Well, so in the future, I think you have to expect everyone's election are going to be influenced anyway. I was a chief election judge in Anne Arundel County for 6 elections, and we had it was computerized voting, and I'm going to tell you, it was so insecure, and I kept raising my hand in the class, saying, "You can't do that, And it takes a conspiracy of 2 to change votes. That's all it takes, and so they have actually in Maryland have gone back to paper ballots this year. But hard to influence large elections, like a national election, because every jurisdiction has their own process, their own machines, and they're not interconnected. But, that's the way we're headed. Let's connect everything to everybody. So, I guess the bottom line is ignorance is not bliss. The government, I ran the Hanover hacker case in 1986, and still the government hasn't done shit. We still don't have our act together. If you go back and you read the Cuckoo's Egg, we're no better off today. In fact, we're much worse off today because computers are integrated in everything that we do. Just sad. Critical infrastructure protection. In 96, when I left the Senate, I went to the President's Infrastructure Protection Task Force down at the FBI headquarters, and we were going to protect the critical infrastructure for the United States. There were 6 of us, chaired by the FBI. Anybody here from the FBI? Oh, so you guys haven't had the lobotomy? Okay. That was the worst 2 years of my career. After working at the Senate and working for OSI, you're running at 110 miles an hour, and you got to the FBI and it's glacier-like. I can give you so many horror stories about working at FBI headquarters, and they used the word perfect. You weren't allowed to have email addresses. You didn't have cell phones. I had to fight to get an answering machine. There's 6 of us. We're out on the road protecting America's infrastructure, right, for 2 years, and we had no voicemail. We wanted to produce brochures, and after a 3-month process, the Department of Justice turned us down because it was more than 3 colors. Okay, so I'm flipping serious. Well, after I left the President's Infrastructure Protection Task Force, I went back to the Pentagon working for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Command, Control, Communications, and Intelligence. And while I was over there, I got a call from Senator Nunn's office, and he had been contacted by 20th Century Fox and David Marconi, and they were writing a script for a movie called WorldWar3.com. So I don't know why, but they authorized me to meet with this guy. They probably wish they hadn't. Well, David Marconi, he wrote Enemy of the State with Will Smith and Gene Hackman. He also wrote Mission Impossible 2. And he was writing this movie called WorldWar3.com. And the premise of the movie was that this was in 1998, and there was a U.S. airstrike in Libya taking out a factory that produced chemical weapons. And this hacker who lived in Libya, his father was killed in that. So he unites all the hackers from all over the world to go after the critical infrastructure of the United States as a payback. So that was the premise of the movie. Well, we collaborated on it for about 6 or 7 months, and he started writing the movie. And so I didn't hear anything. And so I contacted him in 2000. I said, hey, what's the deal? He said, it's on the fast track. We're moving. 2002 occurs. I contacted him again and said, what's the scoop? He said, after 9/11, anything to deal with terrorism got put on the shelf. Got it. Well, in 2005, I get this call from David, and he says, guess what? Congratulations. I said, why? What I do now? And he says, we made the movie. It's called Live Free or Die Hard with Willis, right? Bruce Willis. And what they had done was they wanted to write a new movie for Die Hard series. And so they went and took the WorldWar3.com off the shelf, brushed it off, and just had a new hero. So the Smithsonian CHANNEL. So I said, hey, do I get to go to the premiere? No. I said, I wrote all the infrastructure attacks. He said, but I'll send you a poster. I'm still flipping, waiting. Anyway, don't get paid for that because I did it while I was working for the government. So I guess in 2012, I get a call from David. He's living in Paris. And he says, hey, the Smithsonian CHANNEL has this series on the Real Story series. I don't know if you've all seen it on the Smithsonian CHANNEL. And they do a documentary on the real story behind a movie. So like on the Da Vinci Code, True Grit, Saving Private Ryan, and they wanted to do one on Live Free or Die Hard. So they said, you need to talk to Jim Christy. So they, the BBC sent over a team, spent a couple days with me. And so if you remember, Live Free or Die Hard, we had the fire sale. Everybody remember that? And everything must go. And you remember Gabriel, the bad guy, to McCain, told him, John, you're a Timex watch in a digital age. Okay? So that kind of resonated with me. So fire sale, so I wrote all these critical infrastructure attacks, which the government was really happy about. But they still haven't done anything about them. And today, cities are now connected. And I can remember when I was on the President's Infrastructure Protection Task Force, we were interviewing the folks who run the traffic control system for Los Angeles. And they hired a company to come in and automate the traffic control system. And so I said, is it connected to the internet? Nope, not connected. Everything it's a closed system. I said, where's the maintenance come from? Oh, it comes out of Atlanta. They dial in. So some things just haven't changed. Military bases, they all have SCADA systems. Everybody knows what SCADA systems are. But each base has their own SCADA system. Controls the power, controls the water, the sewage, electricity, traffic systems, the whole 9 yards, all controlled by the civil engineers. They know a lot about cyber. And what's really scary is that 85% of the critical infrastructure in the United States is owned by the private sector. Well, you think the government's going to come help you if you have a problem? You know what they tell you? You can shit and sleigh ride in it. Have a nice life. You're critical infrastructure. Do you think the private sector shares vulnerabilities and things like that with the government? No, that doesn't happen either. So these critical infrastructures are becoming more and more complex and more dependent and more connected, and the government has no oversight over the security. Now, this may be a little controversial, but I kind of think if you look around any public building, what do you see? You see sprinkler systems. Do you think the building owner put sprinkler systems in to save your ass during a fire? No, they put them in because state and local government put laws in for minimum security to protect public safety. So if it's a critical infrastructure like power or finances or a dam, do you think they should have to meet a minimum standard for security? That's up for debate. So, don't be a Timex watch in a digital age, government. Now I'm going to go off a little bit on the intelligence community and law enforcement community, which is my background. The intel community has had the lead in the cyber realm since 90, before Desert Storm. But unfortunately, everything is classified. It was kind of interesting. When I went to work for Senator Nunn, one of my jobs was to go around. We had to go around, interview witnesses, and find out what the hell the government was doing in all the different agencies. So we went over to NSA, okay? And they gave me a classified briefing on the Hanover hacker case. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? How is that classified? Oh, it shows a vulnerability. I said, it's in a flipping book. That's public, that's been out there for 10 years. How can that be classified? Oh no, this is the rules that we have. I was talking to somebody's from Army MI, okay? In the old days, I would not coordinate my cases or take any information from anybody from Army MI. And the reason was because I was looking for a kid who was hacking a government system, and if I talked to the Army MI, all the information I got from them was classified, which I couldn't pass on to the local police department who was going to arrest the guy. So, we've done ourselves a major disservice by classifying everything. Law enforcement is starting to catch up in the cyber world, but I showed you how many law enforcement agencies there are in the United States, right? Over 18,000 different law enforcement agencies, independent, autonomous law enforcement agencies in the United States alone. Do you think everybody has a cybercrime investigator? Can you think of any crime that doesn't have a cyber nexus today? I don't think so. But law enforcement's catching up. But the federal guys, they classify everything as well. So if they classify it, they're not going to share it with the private sector or the victims. And remember, critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector, so they don't get, the information that the government has. So I think the federal government has significantly hurt our public safety and national and economic security by classifying everything. This is just too critical. Defense is important. And the reason the intelligence community classifies everything is so they can use it themselves offensively everywhere else in the world. Offense always takes precedent over defense. And government's unwilling to share their tactics, tools, and procedures with the rest of us. So cybercrime. Anybody want to take a guess what the number one cybercrime in the world is? Kiddie porn is a terrible term. Child porn. Kiddie porn kind of minimizes. Child pornography is the sexual abuse of children. So no, cops do it too. It just pisses me off. You pissed me off already. Child pornography. Every time you show an image of a child in a sexually explicit manner, you have sexually abused that child. I think everybody can agree there's probably not much that's more horrific than that. Pedophiles have always leveraged new technologies. Before we had the World Wide Web, they were doing digital diaries. Before we had digital photographs, they were doing digital diaries, and they were using encryption to encrypt those diaries. Then we had digital pictures and videos, and that just proliferated. In the old days, if you wanted to get a child porn photo, you would have to get a magazine. And so the two most prolific investigative organizations were U.S. Postal and Customs, because it was generally produced overseas and mailed into the United States. But today, every one of you could be a child pornographer, a producer and distributor. Anybody who is a somebody's going to raise their hand one day, I know. Steganography. First time we encountered steganography in law enforcement was with pedophiles. When I was running the lab at the Defense Cybercrime Center, I got a call from an investigator in Tennessee, and he said, "Hey, Christy, I know you guys do a lot of child porn up there." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, are you seeing train pictures? And I go, "Shit, I don't know. I'm not looking for train pictures." He says, "We have a child pornography ring of train aficionados. And what they do is they stag the child pornography in train pictures, and then they exchange the train pictures." Well, if you don't know that as a law enforcement agency, how would you know to look for it and how to decrypt it and destag it? And so the best place to deal with this stuff is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have law enforcement embedded with them, and they do a tremendous job. Today's vehicles, everybody knows, can have more than 40 wireless access points. My SUV was talking to me on the way in this morning. Tell me I'm changing lanes and I need to slow down. It emails me, once a month or when there's a maintenance issue. So each vehicle has two major networks. They got a controller area network and an infotainment network, and everything is accessed wirelessly. And so we went to a camp. That was 2013 at Ohio State. And it was kind of interesting. So, I believe, I'll skip right over today. Well, first off, that controller area network controls your flipping, steering, and your braking. When you turn the wheel, all you're doing is having a sensor tell the wheels to turn. Well, or you brake. I think there are critical systems in an automobile, like steering and brakes, that you ought to be able to have control over and not be wireless. Okay? But that's not the way the manufacturers think. They think, hey, we can save money. We can do it faster, cheaper this way. But, pretty scary. But the hacking camp that we went to, 5 manufacturers came in. They had cars on dynos running 55 miles an hour, and they had kids lined up with laptops hacking the systems. They had to tow two of the cars away. They couldn't drive them. The kids had screwed them up so bad. And so I was doing a keynote for them, and so one of the vehicle reps came up to me and wanted to know why a DOD investigator cared about this stuff. That was their mentality. This is only 3-4 years ago. Why would you care? I said, well, number one, as an investigator, if somebody, I'm interested in the forensics of that. If somebody causes that to happen, and as the DOD person, I would like to cause that to happen, to some people. That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? They had no idea. Medical devices, there was a guy convicted of arson. They went back and he had a heart monitor on. And they were able to go back and say the time the fire started, his heart was racing. And they used that as evidence to convict him of the arson. Digital forensics, I think, is key to solving almost any crime today. We went over the different crimes and the motives, but I think, with the digital proliferation today, digital forensics is critical. So unlike DNA can tell you who, digital forensics, digital evidence can answer all the who, what, where, when, why, and how questions. You just can't do it in 10 minutes like you do it on TV. Which goes back to the CSI factor. juries expect you to be able to find all the evidence and do it quickly, and so do judges. So I created a thing that I call digital forensics intelligence. So you have three communities, let's say. You had the national security community, the Department of Defense, the military, the intelligence community. You have the public safety community, law enforcement. And then you have the economic security, private sector communities. And where they all overlap, if you're investigating crimes in those areas, or espionage, or an intrusion, I think digital forensics and the tactics, tools, and procedures used by those investigators are critical. So, law enforcement's work in child pornography, ID theft, organized crime, and you know what? The TTPs are the same for the intelligence community as they are for law enforcement, as they are for the private sector. We all use the same tools. And the bad guys use the same tools and techniques to commit their crimes. And those three communities have to start sharing digital forensics intelligence to be able to solve whatever issue they have. And it's a multidisciplinary field as well. One of the first crimes that we actually used the term digital forensics in was a case I had back in 1991. It was, we had a wife of a GI over in the Philippines, and she was murdered. She was stabbed 42 times. She was off base, found in the front seat of her pickup truck. Husband was a suspect, but he had an alibi. He was on base, and in those days in the Philippines at Clark Air Force Base, you had to sign in and off base. And so he was on base when she was murdered. So our OSI guys went in to interview him as a witness in his office. In the middle of the interview, he jumps up, reaches down into a box on the floor next to his desk, pulls out a pair of pinking shears and a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk and cuts it up. So by the time they stopped him, he had done significant damage. So they called me in D.C. and said, okay, we're sending you these diskettes, this diskette. We want to know what's on them. I'm like, yeah, great. So while they were en route, I'm contacting all the law enforcement agencies in the area. Nobody had a capability to recover the data. So I went to the intelligence community. I went to NSA. So I negotiated with their general counsel, and they said, okay, you can come up and ask, but you're going to have to talk to 6 different groups, and you have to do them individually because one group's not allowed to know what the other group does. And that's okay. So I came up, and so they all told me the same thing. We have a theory on how to get that data, but we've never actually applied that theory, so we don't know whether we would be successful or not. So what we'd have to do is get resources, set up a lab, get equipment, get people, have money, and then in a year we can test these theories. Well, meanwhile, I have a problem with the speedy trial issues. So our boy has to go to trial. So I went to the private sector, and they didn't have a technique or tool for that. So went to the CIA. And CIA said, we can get that data for you. I said, great, thank you. They said, but how we do it is going to be classified. So you won't be able to use the information in court. I'm like, well, what the hell good is that? And he said, well, I said, oh, hey, we'll get the data for you. So we turned over the disk pieces, and you can see when we got them, we started putting them together like a jigsaw. But we didn't have one diskette. We had 2 diskettes, and we had 23 pieces, and we didn't have all the pieces to each diskette. So they were actually different manufacturers. The Mylar was a little bit different color, and we were able to separate them except for the 4 pieces in the middle. We couldn't tell which disk they belonged to. So CIA takes my disks, pieces, 2 weeks later, they called me on the phone and said, okay, come get your damn discs. I said, what does that mean? And they said, we can't tell you over the phone. Okay, so I drive around the Beltway with my deputy, Ed Cutchins, and we go in and they said, we tried our 3 techniques and they didn't work. So unfortunately, here's your diskettes. I said, why don't you just tell me that on the phone? Well, we don't want the bad guys to know that we can't do this. I said, oh. So we jump in the car with our diskette pieces. We're driving back around the Beltway, and Ed says to me, okay, you gave all the big boys a shot. You're going to give me a shot. I said, what the hell are you going to do? He said, I'm going to scotch tape them back together. I said, get out of here. You can't scotch tape discs, because on a floppy disk, the head actually rides on the mylar. There's no air gap like in a hard drive. I said, you're going to rip the read-write heads off. He said, geez, don't know if we don't try. It's okay. Get back to the office. We grab a couple of diskettes. We put some data on them, and we cut them in quarters, and then we tape them on one side, put them back in the jacket, and he whips out my laptop with my external 5 1/4 drive. And I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to read it. I said, you're going to rip my read-write heads off. He said, won't know if we don't try. I said, okay. Turned it on, and it took about 15 seconds, and you could hear the heads flying around on the inside of the chassis. So we won't say what I said. So we pulled it out and said, let's pretend we're NSA scientists. So we pulled the disc out of the jacket, and one of the NSA guys said, what'd you do, take a coffee break? No. So we pulled the disc out of the jacket. Where the splice was on the top was still nice and smooth. On the back side where the tape was frayed. Tape is what ripped the read-write heads off. So we need to start brainstorming. How do we cover up that tape? So I said, what if we put another blank diskette and sandwich the tape between 2 discs? So we tried that. So while I'm doing that, Ed goes up to the small computer tech center and get a stack of external drives, because I know we're going to rip the hell out of these things, and put it in. And we had 2 diskettes. One had the character A's throughout the whole disk. The other had character B's. And we were able to do physical reads and get A's from the top and B's from the bottom. So now we had a technique. Problem was, the disk pieces had been crumpled up. So we had to find a way to iron them. So I tried to put a T-shirt over it and iron it with an iron. That didn't work. So what we found was a soldering iron. Attached to a rheostat so we could adjust the temperature. And then we took a piece of brushed aluminum tubing and slit it and put that over the heating element of the soldering iron, and we rolled that, and that took the creases out, and we were able to make that work. But if you look at the orientation, some of these pieces don't have an outer edge or inner hub, so we didn't know actually how to align them when we taped them back together. So I found this stuff called Magnecy. It's a real fine ferrous powder suspended in alcohol-based solution. You shake it up and you throw it on magnetic media. The magnetic particles align with the magnetized spots. The liquid evaporates, and you can actually see tracks and sectors. And if you can see them, now you can align them, because it was only a 3.5 inch out of 5 1/4 inch disc. It wasn't very dense. So with a magnifying glass, you could actually align them and then tape them together and brush off the powder. So we were able to get somewhere between 85 and 95% of the data off each and every piece. And what we found was that our subject, his wife, had actually divorced him and left the Philippines and moved back to the United States. And we found the love letters that he was sending to her, saying, please, I love you, come back and remarry me, and which she did. At the same time he was sending those letters, he was sending letters to his Filipino housekeeper, who was his girlfriend, asking her to hire the hitman. When his wife came back, we found the letters for the hitman, and she hired 2 of her cousins, and they shared $105, stabbed her 42 times, and killed her. So we found all that, and then we found the letter upping her life insurance to $450,000. So once he was confronted with all that information, he pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. So Forensics Files did a piece on this. So every once in a while somebody calls me and says, "Hey, your Forensics Files cut up diskette cases on TV to now." So if you see it, it's called Sheer Luck, which pissed me off. That was not sheer luck. That was research. Okay, for the last couple minutes, I'm going to talk about what I've been working on since September. So I was asked to join a cold case team for D.B. Cooper. So everybody knows D.B. Cooper, right? He was his name actually was Dan Cooper on the ticket, and the media screwed it up and made it D.B. Cooper, and that just stuck. But he hijacked a Northwest Orient Flight 305 day after Thanksgiving in 1971, and today it's still the only unsolved U.S. hijacking. He ransomed the passengers, plane, and crew for $200,000, which is equivalent to about $1 million today. Demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. So when they landed in Seattle, when the parachutes and the money came on board, he allowed the passengers to leave, and he kept the crew and demanded they fly him to Mexico. En route, he went down the back stairway, never to be heard from again. And all the crew, he made go up in the front. He had a briefcase with a real or simulated bomb in it. So nobody knows from Seattle, they were going to refuel in Reno. Nobody knows where he jumped. But they felt a vibration still in Washington State. And they think that he jumped in Washington State. Never to be heard from again. So they don't know whether he died or whether he was successful in the jump. So a friend of mine, he's a friend of mine now, I didn't know him then, is leading a cold case team. His name is Tom Cobert. And so if you go to his website, dbcooper.com, he has all the videos and interesting information on D.B. Cooper. So he comprised a cold case team of over 40 federal, state, and local law enforcement, polygraphers. Polygraphers were really key in this. Criminologists, prosecutors, judges, intel guys, forensic experts, handwriting experts, and it's been a 6-year investigation. And the History Channel aired a 4-hour episode last July. So, Cooper, they identified who they believe the suspect is. They believe it's a 73-year-old, lives in San Diego today, Robert Rackstraw. And you can see the FBI sketch artist and then his military picture from 1971. Pretty similar. The FBI identified him as a suspect in 78, but then let him go. He was kicked out of the Army for fraud in 1971, about 4 months prior to the hijacking. He had airborne jump school and helicopter pilot school, and as you can see, he does resemble the sketch. He was an explosives expert, so he could have built a real or fake bomb. Military and sport parachutist. He was stationed in Vietnam for 2 or 3 tours, and he jumped with the Army. He also did sport jumping with the Army. He was a heavy smoker, and in 79 he was training the Shah of Iran's helicopter pilots. He was tried and acquitted of murdering his father-in-law, and he was convicted felony for check kiting, plane theft, and illegal explosives. Served 2 years in federal prison. Kind of a timeline on him. He enlisted in the Army Guard in 64, infantry jump school 67. 68 he battered his wife for the first time, or at least we reported the first time, and she put in divorce papers and then withdrew them later. In 68 he also went to PSYOPs training, helicopter school. 69 deployed to Vietnam, and he was actually a war hero in Vietnam. Rackstraw had a Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross twice. He was promoted. He started out as enlisted, became a warrant officer, and then a first lieutenant. And then in 1971, he battered his wife again, and the wife and kids went to a shelter. Army opened an investigation, and in June, he was certified as a commercial chopper and fixed wing instructor. But the investigation concluded, and he was kicked out of the military because he lied about his college records. He actually was a high school dropout. And he disappeared when he got kicked out. And he disappeared in June of 71, and in November 24th, day after Thanksgiving, was the hijacking. So we think that was kind of a motive. The flight attendant asked him while she was sitting in the back while they were talking, and she says, "Why are you doing this to Northwest Orient?" She said, "Do you have a grudge against Northwest Orient?" He goes, "No, just a grudge." Some of the other quotes, when he was following his sentencing for the fraud and explosives charge, a reporter asked him if he was the hijacker, because there was always rumors that he was the D.B. Cooper. And he, smart ass, "I'm afraid of heights." And he says, "Reporter, you have parachute training, and as you mentioned yourself, your background suggests that you could have been D.B. Cooper." Could have been. I could have been. You don't want to commit yourself one way or the other? Nope. Can't commit myself on something like that, Warren. He does not deny that he's D.B. Cooper, So, no cyber nexus to this crime back in 1971. Once the History Channel documentary aired, there are several, forever, there have been Cooper research websites out there. And all these sleuths, law enforcement guys, private investigators, they all have been trying to figure out for 45 years who D.B. Cooper is. Well, we monitored those, and two bloggers with no history of blogging popped up on three of the computer-related, the Cooper-related websites. And they seemed to have information that our team had collected that nobody else knew, that we hadn't publicized, wasn't in the History Channel documentary. The team has accumulated over 110 pieces of unique evidence that points directly circumstantially to Rackstraw, which I can't get into, but if you go to the website, you will see, the ton of information. Theory was Rackstraw was the blogger, or he had people blogging that he was controlling for him. So I was asked to join the cold case team to identify who the bloggers were. So I put an undercover team together. Four of us created fake identities and joined these Cooper research sites. The team had over 130 years of cyber investigative experience. And I used the same technique I used in 1987 on a pedophile bulletin board. So what we did was we all joined at a different time, and then talked among ourselves, knowing other people were watching, trying to draw him in. And it took about 2 weeks, but I coordinated and scripted all the team's comments, online comments, and we brainstormed how to get this guy to come to us, and then we set up a document that as bait that was going to be surveilled, and took about 2 weeks, and he took the bait, and we reconciled his location to North Hollywood. So not definitive, but in the so this is the interesting part. A guy, because this History Channel episode had aired, some guy calls Tom Cobert out of the clear blue and said, "Hey, I'm a 32-year-old male from Mississippi, and I've catfished Rackstraw on Facebook. And so, so Colbert says, hey, that's computer. You guys, can you handle that? I said, yeah, so I'll run them. So I kept the two operations separate. I didn't let my catfisher know about our other op. So everybody knows what a catfisher is, right? It's a bottom-dwelling thing. So this catfisher, he pretended he was a nurse, 52 years old, from Mississippi, sent flattering messages to Rackstraw and a friend request. Asked him if he was D.B. Cooper. After a month, Rackstraw accepted and started to interact with Kelly. So I wanted to know who I'm dealing with. So we exchanged a couple of emails and finally had a phone conversation. And I wanted to know his motivation for doing this. And he said he was bored, saw the Cooper documentary. He was married with 3 kids. His wife divorced him due to his previous Facebook activity. But they were back together. And he catfished for fun to satisfy his Facebook urges, and because his wife wouldn't allow him to have a Facebook account. So he had others, And let me tell you, so I had my ex-wife was an agent. She's a private investigator, so I called her and I said, "Hey, can you do a records check on this guy and background investigation on Kelly?" So all the information that he had provided me was accurate. 32 years old, 3 kids, provided his real address in Alabama. Found out he was a pastor of a church, actually, and his father was a pastor also. Well, if you've seen what he was sending, I don't think my pastor talks like that. So, so he then started to flood me with the texts that he was exchanging with Rackstraw. And Rackstraw was providing him with lots of pictures from Vietnam. And then he provided this one. Kelly said that, her father was in the army with him. So that's kind of one of the hooks. So he sent this picture of himself when he was supposed to be 35 years old as a lieutenant colonel. Well, he was actually kicked out of the Army as a first lieutenant in 1971. So all those medals and decorations were fake. He then sent her a picture of his boat that he has in San Diego, a 50-foot yacht. The name of the yacht is Poverty Sucks. And a picture of the stateroom where he was going to service her. And of course, he had his lieutenant colonel fake picture on there, on the wall. Well, then all of a sudden, Kelly starts sending me unsolicited copies of his recent sexting with Rackstraw. And I said, listen, doesn't help my investigation. It doesn't help. I know a lot of people that would say they were D.B. Cooper if they thought they were going to get a blowjob, So it doesn't help the investigation, okay? Sorry, but this. So stop, okay? So part of running an informant is that you have to be able to control them. So after a couple of days, he kept sending me more and more, and it kept getting deeper and deeper. And I finally said, "Hey, listen, I'm terminating contact with you. If you find out anything about D.B. Cooper, be glad to accept that. But have a nice day." So these are some of the texts. So that's Kelly on the left, in case you weren't sure, and D.B. Cooper. So now you've seen a picture of D.B. Cooper's penis. So some things. So now I can tell you, only 4 people in the whole world had ever seen that picture till today. Okay? So now you'll have to think about it all your life, like I do. I actually made the the censor part a little bigger than it really needed to be, but Catfisher had a meltdown. So when I stopped the contact with him, 2 weeks later, he joins our website where my undercover op is going. And he joins with his real name. And he starts ranting and raving about how he catfished Rackstraw. And Rackstraw is on watching you, you asshole. Stop. So I'm sending him texts. Hey, he's watching. You don't understand. And he just wouldn't stop. So finally, I called the system administrator, and we got him kicked off. And he still was trying to get on. He was going to other sites. So I called his father. and it stopped. I said, and he called me and said, "Don't call my family." I said, "My next call is to your wife. So you stop now." So he did stop. So he continues. He's like my best friend. And he sends me texts and theories on Cooper all the time. He became Facebook friends with Rackstraw's wife and daughter. And he's created other personas out there. So I contact Facebook security periodically and have him kicked off. So unfortunately, we can't conclude from our op whether Rackstraw was the blogger or directing the bloggers. But the investigation continues, and there'll be magazine articles. There's a book, Master Outlaw, The Last of the Master Outlaws, and things like that. So, I did have a call the other day from the Abraham Lincoln assassination cold case team. So you never know when cyber's going to, have a role in a case. So, remember, don't be a Timex watch in a digital age. If you're interested, I blog a little bit for Symmetria. So I trash all the different entities in the government. So if you're interested, please friend me. And if you need to contact me, this is how you get a hold of me. Okay. Questions, or you have time for questions? No questions. All right, see you guys.